Hi, and welcome back to another lesson. Today I'm going to show you how to basically improve on your chord voicings when you're playing jazz chords. When I started learning piano, the first thing I learned was simple chords like triads, let's say a C major. And I learned that in the left hand, usually it sounds best when I play a double bass. And then I learned how to play like rock progressions or pop songs, which might sound something like this. Now this sounds fine, but it's not really a good way to go about playing jazz chords. When people come into jazz from rock or pop, they encounter something like a C major 9 chord. And they say, okay, I'll just take the bass note here and play it as a double bass. Maybe they'll do it up an octave. Now this sounds okay, but in fact there are much better choices usually when you come to voice jazz chords. And I'm going to walk you through them and point them out as we go back and analyze the chord progression I played at the beginning. So without much ado, let's do exactly that. We'll start with the first chord. This is a C major 9 chord. And in the left hand, I'm playing 3 of the notes in the C major 9 chord. So here's the full C major 9 chord, and I've kept the 3rd, the 7th, and the root up here. The first rule I'll teach you, and it's really not a rule, it's more of a suggestion. When you come to look at the degrees in the C major 9 chord, you have the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th degrees of the C major scale. When you come to choose which of these degrees you'll play in your left hand, the two most important ones that you'll usually want to keep, not always, but usually, are the 3rd and the 7th. The next most important one is the root, and then the 5th. And you usually want to leave the higher degrees, the 9s and all of the tensions, to your right hand. That's kind of a general scheme of things. Now, here I'm playing the 3rd and the 7th degrees, and I also have the root. I don't really have to keep it, because the idea is that there is a bass player somewhere in the band that is playing the C bass note somewhere. So you sometimes, a lot of the times, don't really have to play it yourself. Even if there's no bass player, it turns out, just the way it is, that if the chord progression flows smoothly enough, you can omit the root. It just sounds fine. It actually sounds pretty good a lot of the time. Now here, I'm playing the 3rd, 7th, and root in my left hand. And in the right hand I have the 9th degree, and then I'm doubling the 3rd and 5th. This is just the melody. Let's look at the second chord. Contrary to what the software on the screen is suggesting, this is not, at least in my view, I mean, formally it is, an E flat dominant 7, but I actually prefer to think of it as an A dominant 7th. Now, here's an A dominant 7th chord, and you have the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and flattened 7th degrees of the A major scale. And I'm only going to keep the 3rd and the 7th, or flattened 7th in this case. This frees up my right hand to play the interesting tensions and the melody note. So in this case, the interesting tensions are the flat 9, and this would be a flat 5 as well. And here's my melody note. If I add the A, the root, you'll see that the chord recognition software now correctly, in my opinion, categorizes it as an A dominant 7th chord. But again, you should assume that there's a bass player playing the bass note. So you usually don't need to worry about it. And I hope listening to this progression, you happen to agree with me. The next chord is a D9 sus4. Now there's no third in a sus4 chord, so I can't really play a third here. So I'm playing the 4th instead. And I would play the 7th as well, but I'm already playing it in my right hand. I've sort of divided the weight and decided to play it in my right hand. I could have played something like this in my left hand, and you know, I have the root, the sus4, the 5th and the 7th degrees, and then just play these two notes in my right hand. That's fine as well. I chose to keep the root here and the 5th just because it gives it a slightly fuller sound. If I were playing this lower, I might choose to omit them. Then the next chord is a G dominant 7th chord. Let's look at the left hand again. Here's a D dominant 7th chord. 1st, 3rd, 5th, flattened 7 degrees of the G major scale. I'm keeping the 3rd and the 5th, and I've also decided to add in the root. I can omit it, I don't really have to have it there, but it just sounds better to me, sounds a little bit fuller. In the right hand, this frees up my right hand to play interesting tensions. So I have the flat 9, flat 5, doubling the 7th, and the melody note up here. Even if I omit the root, it still sounds pretty good. Right? At least to my ears. The next chord is an E minor 7th with a flattened 5 degree. In the left hand, as before, I have and here's an E minor chord. Here's the flattened 5th. And 1st, 3rd, flattened 5th, and 7th degrees of the scale, the E minor scale. And I've omitted the 5th, and I've kept the 3rd, 7th, and added the root. Again, this gives it a little bit more body, which is nice. It doesn't have to be there. In the right hand, I'm playing the melody note, the altered degrees and the tensions, and here in this case it's the flattened 5th. And I'm playing the 5th, I don't have to, but it sounds a little bit fuller to me. Sorry, this is the 3rd. Now, this progression has some chromaticity to it. The left hand moves from here to here to here to here. All of these forms, as we go through them, are going to have the same philosophy behind them. We're going to play the root, the 3rd, and the 7th degrees of the corresponding scale on which the chord is built. So, the E minor, flattened 5th. This is an E flat dominant 7th with an added, well, actually an E flattened dominant 9th chord, really. Again, I'm playing this is an E flat dominant 7th chord, or dominant 9th chord, and I'm keeping the root, the 1st degree, the 3rd degree, and the 7th degree of the scale. And then in my right hand, I'm adding the melody note, and I'm just doubling a few of the notes to add some volume, some body to my playing. Next chord is a D minor 11. Left hand, here's a D minor 7th chord, here's a D minor 11th chord, root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th. Keep the root, 3rd, and 7th. In the right hand, play the melody note and play the 9th, the higher degrees, the 9th and the 11th. I've doubled this here because I'm playing the 5th, the A is the 5th really. You don't really have to, but it sounds a little bit nicer to me because it has this major second interval here. This gives it kind of a modern sound. Not a big issue though. And then finally a D flat dominant 7th with a sharp 9th degree. Same sort of idea on the left hand, root, 3rd, 7th. And in the right hand, I'm doubling, I'm playing the 5th as well, and I'm adding the sharp 9. The same sort of voicing is then used also for the ascending chords. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7. That's all. And then in the right hand, just playing the melody. If I were playing things down here, say, you can hear how using the same voicing sounds very muddy. So, depending on where you are in the keyboard, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful on what you're doing. You don't want to play things down too low, because it will just muddy up the chords. If you do have to descend down the keyboard, you'll have to use fewer and fewer notes. I would probably not play this down here. And if I did, I would maybe just keep the bass note. This is actually one of the few cases where playing the root, and maybe just the root, makes a little bit more sense. But I've chosen to play it up here just because it sounds nicer. Some cases, if you really feel the urge to play a double bass, resist it, and you can instead of the doubling, you can play the root, and you can play just the 7th degree. This is also done many times, especially if you want something that is a little bit more snappy and you don't want to sort of step on the toes of other players and other harmonies and notes that are occurring in the arrangement. This is particularly nice for dominant 7th chords as well. Well, you get the idea. Of course, you can always resort back to just playing the 3rd and the 7th as well. This also kind of gives it a spacious feel. So we're just alternating between a C dominant 7th with the 3rd and the 7th, and an F dominant 7 with the 3rd and the 7th, but taking the 7th and moving it down an octave. So it's like an inversion. Anyway, these are just some ideas that I hope you'll keep in mind when you approach voicing your own jazz chords. third and seventh, maybe root in the left hand as a sort of default, and then use the right hand to play the melody, the upper notes, degrees, the tensions, and maybe to double things if you feel the sound isn't full enough. That's it. I hope you've learned something interesting, and I'll see you next time.